Okay, I'm Steve Clemons. I'm with the Foreign Policy Program here at the New America of a Nation, and I blog at the Washington Note. And we're here with my friend David Miliband, of course, the former Foreign Minister of Great Britain and still a member of Parliament. David, thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you. We've had a good session this morning with the bloggers.
Yeah, exactly. Let me ask you a question about this tumultuous time we're in. When you look at the Middle East and you sort of see this tsunami of change, President Obama, in a meeting where I was at, actually said that this is one of the greatest opportunities to realign America's interests and values. But it seems to be hard to do that because sometimes when you're making bets on where you deploy force, where you don't deploy force, and how do you look at a tsunami that's not done yet, this intersection of values and interests is complex, to say the least. But I'm interested if how you see this region and where the West, if you will, where Great Britain, where Europe, where the United States should be placing its bets regarding the future of this area.
It's a massive question. We're out in the open seas of foreign policy and we can't see the horizons. And that's what makes it very, very challenging with all sorts of currents underneath. What do we know? We know that the West was not influential in creating these revolts. These are homegrown. Secondly, we know, I think, that these countries and the rulers of these countries faced crises of legitimacy. I see in Mubarak's fall a legitimacy crisis. He had nothing to fall back on. He had neither revolutionary links, he had neither monarchical links, he had no democratic mandate, he had no clean government, he had no delivery of prosperity to his own people. He had no story about Egypt's role in the region or in the world or its own future. So it was a legitimacy crisis. But it was also something else, and I think this is important when one thinks about aligning values and interests. This revolt was a civilian surge born of millions of Egyptians knowing that, especially young people around the world, were living different lives with greater human dignity than they themselves were enjoying. And I think that, in that sense, this is a very inspiring moment. I think President Obama has picked this up because the bar for legitimate rule has been raised, even in undemocratic countries. Now, I think that in Egypt, they're going to move, some people argue too fast, to parliamentary and presidential elections. But this civilian surge is born of an assertion of human dignity which speaks to our values. Now, of course, our interests are going to depend on the outcomes. And I think the words optimist and pessimist don't really help here. There are cross currents. But I think that it's also fair to say that our own test is one of whether or not we're always consistent, because it's very hard to be absolutely consistent. But if we fall into the trap of hypocrisy, then we've got big trouble. Because the transparency, the flatness of the modern world means that whether in the public or the private sector, hypocrisy is the cardinal sin.
You know, Great Britain now has stakes in this game. The United States, France. We've shown that we're not going to sit on the sidelines, that there is involvement in some areas. Do you think there needs to be more outreach and partnership with Arab voices than we've had?
Well, I think that the vision of an open and connected world that is respectful of difference but asserts universal values is a fantastic vision. And so, and of course, the real autocrats, the Irans of this world, the Iranian rulers, what they fear more than anything else is engagement. They actually, in Iran, they fear engagement more than they fear military engagement. They fear cultural engagement more than they fear military engagement. And I think that one wants to see as much smart power being deployed in as many ways, whether on culture, education, trade, institution building, as possible. Equally, it's a networked world. However big British development aid, or even European development aid in the Middle East and North Africa, it's going to be dwarfed by what the Saudis do. And that's why it's a networked world, not a bilateral world. And we have to think very, very hard about how we engage all of the countries in the region, not just the immediate object of our hopes.
And maybe finally, I heard something in our earlier talk that really intrigued me. It's the Miliband proposal for Afghanistan, the Miliband model, if you will. Can you share with us how you think we need to approach Afghanistan? This is now our longest war in the United States. It is controversial. We're spending $119 billion there this next year. The country has a GDP of $14 billion. people across the political spectrum say there's got to be a better way to change the vector of this country.
Well, I think that.
How do you see?
I mean, at the moment, we are institution building, we are fighting, we are development aiding with one hand tied behind our back, or possibly two hands tied behind our back, because until we establish the process for a political settlement, then no amount of troops, no amount of development aid, no amount of institution building is going to be able to work, because there's no North Star by which to guide us. And the North Star for me is a political settlement based on very simple principles. Al-Qaeda out, all the tribes in, including all the Pashtuns, and the neighbours on side.
Right.
And the West has to declare its hand, because the Taliban, to take one part of the equation, are not going to show their hand until we are clear about ours. We are the agenda setters. They want to know what are the West's bottom lines. And I've argued for an international mediator, a UN-sponsored mediator, who can treat us as parties to the conflict, but also treat the Afghan government and the insurgents as parties to the conflict. And the truth is that you only ever end insurgencies or civil wars through political settlement. And in the Afghan case, it's going to be a series of political settlements across the villages and valleys of Afghanistan. I hope people go to davidmiliband.net. They can read my long lecture at MIT on this. But I think that it's only when we're clear that it's not enough to say there's no military solution. You've got to say there is a political solution, and it's internal and it's regional, that you're going to get the sort of security, institution building and development progress that Afghanistan needs and that we need as well. Because if anything else is true, as long as you're spending $119 billion and we've got 10,000 British troops, our capacity to do good elsewhere is massively reduced, in some ways emasculated. So
the Miliband proposal sounds very similar to what Lakhdar Brahimi and Tom Pickering just did in the Century Foundation proposal on negotiating peace, essentially. And would you find that to be...
I think it was a really good piece of work. Really good piece of work.
Would you be available if the UN came knocking to be the
No, I've
negotiator?
said that this is not a job application. I thought of that.
I think it's
got to be someone from the Muslim world.
I see.
I think that the UN needs to appoint someone from the Muslim world because, well, for obvious reasons.
But you could staff the person.
No. I'm a proud member of Parliament for South Shields.
Okay, David, thanks so much. Thanks for being here.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks.
you.